Hi, ki tēnei hui. Welcome to this second Q&A session on our decisions about water. Starting with newsflash. Of course, as we anticipated, that this could happen, and it has happened. That Bill 3, the legislation, has dropped about an hour ago. You know, could have been yesterday, couldn't it? Anyway, I guess I just want to, we can have an opportunity. I'm going to go to Margot to hear a little bit of an update about the very quick initial read that has happened. I am aware that this puts us, we've talked about a lot being in a dynamic situation as related. Dynamic is a code word for maybe like a swear word or something. That my initial reaction that this puts us in a better position to make decisions tomorrow, because we were going to have to make it with absolutely no idea what was in Bill 3, and we will have some idea of what is in Bill 3 when we make a decision tomorrow. So, but I'm obviously you may have questions about how this news affects the decision-making process, given given that it's so recent, and also how it might impact on the nature of the resolutions tomorrow, that we may be able to adjust them to take into account what we do know about Bill 3. But I'll stop talking about Bill 3 because I haven't even seen it and Margot has. So if you could make some initial comments, that would be very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, yes, to reiterate, we have spent probably the last hour doing a quick skim read of several hundred pages, hundreds plural, pages of Bill 3. As I understand it, so it has been introduced, so it hasn't had its first reading, and so what that means is when we're talking about things like submission timeframes, that's not confirmed either. So it's what we understand, looking to Dougal, is it's possibly the submission timeframe will be mid-February. So it gives us a bit of time to really think and digest and provide a robust suite of feedback to make sure that that legislation sets us up well. So in terms of the decisions that we are seeking tomorrow, as our chair has already indicated, we were already setting up to make decisions without Bill 3 and knowing what its implications would be. The advice that we have prepared that is in the papers that you received the end of last week, that advice was prepared based on the policy announcements from government, and as the quick skim read we've made or we've done, we don't believe that direction has changed significantly in terms of how it impacts the advice. So we will spend a few more hours today and before the meeting tomorrow trying to understand that some more. But just to be realistic, there's not a lot of time to work through 400 or 500 pages of draft legislation. And so I think that the last comment I would make is, at this stage, it is a bill. It is not legislation. And we are still working to the impression that it will be enacted towards the middle of next year, so there is still some time before it becomes legislation. And so the decisions we need to make as a council, and yourselves need to make to get us to a WSDP for September next year, they will still need to be made ahead of that legislation coming in. So thank you.
Welcome, Dougal. I'm not sure if there's any opening remarks you would like to make about anything before we go to questions.
Thank you, Chair. And no, I just welcome the opportunity to be along here today and answer any questions that you might have.
Great. Well, I'll take a speaking list of questions. And first of all, I guess I wanted to ask, in terms of the legislation that's come in, that there may be some changes around stormwater. Is that our understanding in an initial read?
So, a very initial read.
Sorry, and don't answer it if it's too early.
What we went looking for was, this announcement that we'd had in August that for stormwater, councils must retain the legal responsibility for stormwater and may not transfer that legal responsibility to a CCO. Went looking for that particularly, and at this point don't see anything in the legislation that does provide that restriction. So at the moment, the first read of the legislation indicates that the legal responsibility for stormwater, like the other two waters, we may be able to transfer that to the CCO, which does change slightly the policy context in which we're making that decision about stormwater.
A follow-up question. Does that mean that we could potentially simplify the options that we go to the public with to be on three waters? And could we have some more advice about that for tomorrow?
Yes to both, yes. So I would like to say, and without constantly repeating myself in the session today, that any advice that we do bring to you tomorrow will be in the context of, with the time that is available and a very high level read through and interpretation. So yes, there will likely be some caveats around any advice we provide, but yes. Yep.
And my final one before I go to the list. So there will be opportunity, even if we make sort of in principle decisions tomorrow, to flesh out the consultation document to represent what our better understanding of the potential legislative environment.
I think what I would say to that, Madam Chair, is all the way along this water reform program, we have been making decisions and providing advice with the best available information. And I would suggest that all the way through, even preparing for consultation, that we will still be in that same position. So it will be the best available advice and our best understanding. So as an example, it has taken probably 3 or 4 months for there to be a thorough understanding of what we always refer to as Bill 2. And so that took several months. We've had numerous webinars with all sorts of organisations and legal organisations. So if we use that as a bit of a benchmark, I would see us being in a similar position for this enduring legislation. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Rogers.
My first question is about the debt covenant scenarios under a single council-controlled organisation. And there was some discussion about S&P consolidating the debt back to us as a council when they provide both our ratings and the entity's ratings. My question was around some of the discussions we had with LGFA when they came in, and I might be recalling incorrectly because it's a while ago now, but my understanding was that they use their internal ratings as well, and there was some discussion from them about the fact that for single council-controlled organisations, unlike S&P, they wouldn't be consolidating that debt back onto the original council's balance sheet.
So, just to clarify a couple of points there. So my comments yesterday were more about the council's credit rating. So I don't have a fully formed opinion about what the entity's credit rating would be, other than without the support from the parent councils, it won't be anywhere near as strong as what we can get our own. There will be a mechanism called notching where the new entities will gain a higher credit rating because they are supported by us as a council. So just to clarify that. Now I've lost my track. And what the second question was about whether the LGFA will provide that debt. Yeah, so LGFA have a different set of methodology or assessment metrics, if that makes sense. They do run an in-house model where they basically assess the credit strength of every council and every CCO in the country, bless them, whereas the S&P are working on a global methodology that compares the council rating, like I said, with our global peers. The likely outcome for a new water entity would be that it would be a different methodology used by S&P if and when we got to that point with an entity, and that would be more akin to what's used in the UK for I'm losing basically their water entities or utility entities. We don't see that methodology currently being used in New Zealand, so it will be quite new for us when it's appropriate to get these entities, the new CCOs credit rated. There is a divergence between how LGFA will look at our credit in the two separate balance sheets versus how S&P will.
And so when the LGFA provides its pricing to both entities, do we have much clarity over whether they rely heavily on their internal assessment of our creditworthiness versus the global assessment by S&P and its peers?
So where there's an external credit rating, at current settings, where there's an external credit rating available, that will be what they use to price our debt, if that makes sense. So we have recently gone from AA plus to AA. There's actually no difference between pricing for those two. If there are councils around the country that do not get an external credit rating, that's when they will default to their internal credit rating to price the debt, and it's all on their pricing schedule. It's quite transparent how they do that.
Can I do one more?
I would also just add to that, Sarah, if I'm correct in noting that those that don't receive a credit rating have a much lower covenant, so there's a risk profile that they also apply. So I think it's around 175%.
175 on their debt to revenue for an
as opposed to a 280% where you rely on an externally credit rated organisation.
Would you like to go back on the list? Okay. Councillor Randall.
Thank you. First question is about the potential change on the stormwater with this new legislation. Would that open up the opportunity to perhaps transfer the assets for managing our stormwater that are currently managed by Wellington Water across to the new entity in addition to the fresh and wastewater? I mean, that's essentially what we're talking about.
Yes, Councillor, that has always been an option. That was an option as we understood it under the earlier announcement as well, that the ownership of the assets could be transferred to a CCO. Under the previous policy announcement, what we had understood was that if we transferred the ownership of those assets to a CCO, the legal responsibility would still remain with council. So you could transfer the ownership of the asset, but not the legal responsibility. Now, in the 45 minutes that we've had to look at the legislation that's 300 pages long, I've gone specifically looking to find anything about that clause. And at this point, what I've found is that the treatment for transferring legal responsibility for drinking water, wastewater and stormwater under this legislation appears to be the same, in which case we can transfer the assets to a new CCO as we could, but we think that we would then also be able to transfer the legal responsibility, and that provides then an alignment between the ownership and the legal responsibility that we had previously thought we would not be able to achieve. So that's the difference. The ownership has always been able to transfer, but it was that alignment between the ownership and the legal responsibility. And our very initial view is that potentially under the new bill, we can transfer both and therefore would have that alignment. If it was at a CCO, we would have that alignment.
Okay, so thank you very much, and I appreciate you've had a very short period of time to flesh this out and make some comment. My second question is while we're talking about tomorrow, the decisions around the preferred entity type or model, the bottom line for most residents is what are we going to pay and what's going to happen to my water rates bill over the foreseeable future. I was just wondering what you can say about what you know now about what the price of water will be going, now, and also whether you'll have more information by the time of the public consultation in March, April.
Thank you, Councillor. So from a WCC point of view, so the decision that we're seeking tomorrow is essentially taking 5 options that are available to us and narrowing those down to as small a possible shortlist for consultation as possible. We took the decision that to help with the workload and to be able to make a decision as fast as possible on the preferred option, that we would limit the amount of information, because there's quite a lot of work involved in getting an answer to what you're asking, councillor. So we could have modelled that for all 5 options and then find that there was a lot of work that didn't progress. So the path we've chosen is to understand what the shortlist is, and then we'll be able to do that modelling, which is required for consultation. For the regional approach or the regional model, that's slightly different, and so I'll hand over to Dougal at this point just to share what he can from a regional model.
Thanks, Margo. So building on the work that's been done to date around the estimated investment and potential costs for people across the region, we're building on that work with the next phase of modelling, and that's particularly targeted to enable that consultation process in March, April. So with the consultation, councils are required to be able to provide information around impacts on debt and impacts on costs. So we need to be able to provide that information. So we're modelling what the investment program required for the future entity is, and also what that might mean for both costs to users and also financial arrangements for the new entity. So that's an iterative process that we're working through at the moment, but that information does need to be available for the consultation. I think, as has been signalled pretty clearly to date, the amount of money that has been available for water has not been enough, so that does need to increase. But what we are trying to do is to carefully balance what's the appropriate affordable program going forward, which addresses the issues that we have as a region, and also how do we balance that with what that costs at an affordable rate for our communities with the use of long-term financing as well. So we're trying to balance those out.
Okay, so just if I can summarise perhaps, what you're saying is that irrespective of whatever entity, the work to date says we're going to have to pay more for water, but you haven't got a specific amount today, but you will have more information for the public consultation.
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Well, that's good, thank you.
Me whānau.
I think this is going back to the debt transfer questions that we had, and I know we're still waiting on more information. But so, will the sludge plant be part of the regional entity, including the debt and revenue? And if yes, would we still be worse off or in a worse off position?
Yeah. So in terms of the sludge plant, we would certainly be looking to transfer the ownership of that. As you're aware, we have funded the sludge plant differently. We manage our debt on a whole of council level, and we have made historical decisions based on how we're going to, borrow further money. So we certainly do need to think about how we've funded the sludge treatment plant and how that's financed as we think about the equity of any transfer, because we are transferring that asset. It has been funded. If we had chosen to fund Tākina, for example, through the IFF or any of our transport projects has been done in Tauranga, then we would have to have borrowed for the sludge treatment plant. So we just need to bring all of this into consideration and part of our discussions with the councils that we know are going to participate in this regional model, and that's part of the conversations that we're having. Yep.
One more question. Yes. Is that, maybe this is a question for you, Dougal, as someone who goes to the AOG meetings, is this something that's going to be discussed this Friday? Or that other councils are aware of this as a potential issue for us?
Yes, so all the other councils are aware that this is a potential issue for Wellington City. So it is an issue that I see would be discussed at the agenda of the AOG on Friday. It is one of the issues that we do need to work through to make sure that all councils have clarity on this ahead of consultation next year, so that you understand what the impacts on your debt position. And I think really, as Andrew has outlined, we're trying to take an approach which looks at the financial transfer, which recognises assets, revenue and debt.
Deputy Mayor Finn.
Kia ora, thank you. Just as we are giving the assets to the CCO, in the event that the water services CCO ceases, do we have the first right? Can we order it so that we can, have those assets back? I guess thinking similarly to how we've run Te Toi Mahana, where, just can we get first right of refusal to get those assets back rather than that going on?
Clear, we haven't transferred the assets to Te Toi Mahana.
No, I know. Sorry, no. I was just trying to get an example and realised that wasn't. Yeah. We had that yesterday. Yeah. No, fair enough.
There are sections in Bill 3 that speak to what happens to the assets if a CCO were to cease or merge or whatever, right? Definitely one of those options is that the assets could return to council. Whether we could set it up in such a way that they must first return to council, we would have to get further advice and come back to you.
There's also mechanisms through the financial transfer that Dougal referred to there. In order for us to stay as shareholders and to support this entity, we need to provide a guarantee into the entity, which has reciprocal rights in that we will be shareholders and therefore those assets will be linked through that. Again, I can't give exact details, but this is the antithesis of the Auckland water care model, whereby they have severed all of these rights to their assets in the future on purpose. I'm not sure whether it was structured that. I can't speak to that, but essentially we are not taking that same approach. We are taking an approach where they will still be linked to us through the debt mechanisms.
Okay.
So again, I can't give much clarity because I haven't read the bill, but there's some
ties.
Yeah, ties there.
Okay. Just with our no worse off solution, are we working alongside DIA with this as well so that they're aware of what our position? So,
Dougal might have a answer in regard to the conversations with DIA, but certainly we've been working with all the councils, and they are. So if we take a step back, under the previous government, actually, we were going through a negotiation process to identify the debt position as at 30 June 2022 and to make an agreement then. DIA agreed with all but two councils, we were one of them, on what that position was. And we're all still working to that same position while we hadn't brought that to you for formal agreement, which would be the natural step, and we would still need to do that when we look at the debt transfer. Certainly from a staff and official perspective, we'd got to a good position where we felt that DIA understood what our situation was, why it had occurred, and what we needed to do to think about that. We just hadn't agreed anything formally in writing and hadn't brought it to you before the change in government happened and before the policy settings had changed. So I have a high degree of confidence that DIA understand the position that we're in through that process. We talked yesterday a little bit about how we'd been working together as a region. Now we've had numerous councils that have moved out of this model, so we need to re-engage with those that will be in the model. But Dougal, do you have a perspective in terms of
Yes, certainly I'd endorse what Andrew has outlined, that DIAs are well aware of the situation for Wellington City. The only thing that I can add is that as part of the economic regulation, DIA are also discussing what this means and how to apply this in relation to economic regulation with the Commerce Commission and with Treasury. And at some point we are expecting some guidance to come from DIA on this matter. So we have raised this with them in respect of their consideration of that policy.
Okay. Just looking for the relationship continuation, really. Great. Last question, Chair. Just what about our proposed debt? Like, what does that mean for our balance sheet going forward? Say, once we've moved into a CCO model, what does that look like for us then?
So in terms of our debt, what we're looking to achieve through this is to ensure that, in effect, our debt position or the covenants that we're working to would be consistent, from where we're planning to be post the transfer of waters. Now, we need to work through that, and then we'd need to bring a proposal to you to ensure that you agree with that position. So that's ultimately the outcome that we are seeking and looking to achieve. It's not just about the debt, though, it's also about the revenues. So we for the new water services delivery entity, we'd be contributing or our Wellington ratepayers are contributing a significant amount of revenue to that. So it's about working through debt, revenue, assets. I think that was the three equations that Sarah just used before, and certainly working through that. But that's what we're trying to achieve. Through any negotiations, there could be benefits and compromises to be made, and we'll need to work through that and bring that back to you for decision.
Councillor Wineta.
So when the LGFA is undertaking debt pricing for a multi-council CCO, are they working solely off the external credit rating of the entity itself, or is it like an aggregate of all the constituent councils?
Yeah, tricky question, but good one. They haven't fully landed or determined how they will price it, but the assumption is that where they have a CCO that's supported by a number of councils, they will take an aggregate or an average of the credit rating of those councils and apply that to the CCO. They haven't said what proportion, whether that would just be a rough average, or if we are more highly weighted, it would have more of our credit rating than, say, an Upper Hutt that has a lower credit rating than us. They're still working through that, and it will also probably form part of the negotiation that the Establishment Board will have to go through to determine things like the debt to revenue ratio that they could achieve and things like that. So it's all part of the mix. They're thinking about it, but they haven't landed a decision as far as I'm aware yet.
Gotcha, thank you. Second question, is the external credit rating the only factor for water stuff that they're going to use for the purposes of their debt tiering system? Tiering, that is, T-I.
For the LGFA?
Yes, for the LGFA. Or are there other factors as well?
Yeah, look, I think the assumption will be that these water entities, and my advice certainly would be that these water entities don't seek a credit rating on day one. They rely, because we have this mechanism of the LGFA being able to lend. Why would they spend the money on getting a credit rating when they know the outcome can be sort of shadow credit rated by the LGFA? So they will have, again, that will become part of the negotiation, but they're more likely to be closer to an unrated guarantor or similar.
Yeah.
Depending on the size of the balance sheet. So that will form part of that conversation about setting up the entity with their debt settings.
So it could be a little more holistic in that regard.
Correct.
Sweet, thank you.
Councillor Free.
So just given the uncertainties about our debt position, I know, sorry everybody, would it be appropriate for us to agree, number two, to agree that we've got a preferred water services delivery model subject to a satisfactory resolution of this debt issue?
Yeah.
And maybe we can get some better wording, but...
Yeah, if that was something that you wish to pursue, that would be achievable.
Certainly, I wish to pursue it. I'm really worried about what this could mean for Wellington ratepayers otherwise.
Yeah.
And then I guess, is there any problem with actually also, and I guess this is a question for Dougal, because we have had the answers internally, but is there any problem with us also having another option we consult on, which would be just to go alone, like a Wellington-only CCO? So the regional one would be the preferred one, but there would be another alternative up our sleeve.
Okay. We're just playing tag as to who gets to answer first, Councillor.
Right.
So you're right. We have provided advice on that, but so Yes, we could go out with multiple options, absolutely, and the legislation enables us to do that. Yes.
Well, especially since our current option actually isn't really an option anymore. So, although we're required to include it, it isn't very feasible.
Yeah, our existing arrangements or status quo. Yeah, yes.
Not really a feasible option.
Yeah.
So while each council will undertake its own legal consultation process, we're trying to align those processes across council so that the timing, the content is similar across our communities. 3 of the councils, Greater Wellington, Hutt City and Porirua City, have determined their short list of options, which is basically the preferred and status quo. Upper Hutt will make decisions on that tomorrow as well. So it may be that Upper Hutt choose to consult on a third option. You may choose to do so as well. The other 3 councils will consult on 2. This was an issue which came up for Masterton when they were contemplating their options, as you'll be aware from their debates. One of the challenges is resourcing multiple options, so that'll be something to consider. I think from the regional program, we're simply looking for clarity of who are we developing a water services delivery plan for. Therefore, we can develop that plan, we can model the financials, we can start thinking about the establishment process. If there is any change in the scope or the makeup of councils, that will lead to rework and time delays. So we're trying to avoid those, but from a regional program perspective, we're just trying to see clarity at this point of which councils are we developing a water services plan for to support your consultation and decision making going forward.
Okay, thank
And I
you.
think, Councillor Free, we've got a legal perspective on that question.
Kia ora koutou. Just wanted to drop in another little information bomb here, which is that Bill 3 actually says that we should consult on yet another option. So we need to consult on status quo, preferred, and at least one further reasonably practicable. So obviously we are in very early stages of that. Yeah. And so obviously extremely preliminary advice, but that's looking
Well,
like
I'm happy with that. It's
yeah. And
boom, done.
So, Margot, yes, you go, and I've got some questions related to this, to add to this.
So for fear of the wrath of our General Counsel, because she is absolutely correct, again, like I said at the outset of this session, we have the Water Services Preliminary Arrangements Act, Bill 2, which is legislation. We have Bill 3, which has been introduced, which is a bill, not legislation. So if we come back to this is the dynamic environment we're in, and we need time to look at how these things play together. This is a classic example of why we need some time, and any advice we give has that caveat around it.
I think for tomorrow we would like some advice on that particular, because I understand an amendment was coming anyway.
Understood.
And so we may incorporate it into the substantive potentially. Can I also? It was an additional question, which was, if we do not include an option tomorrow, it's kind of gone. So if there are things we want to consult on and have feedback, and we can't have a new option post our decisions?
My understanding is that we could.
Oh.
I think, look, the whole point of this is really to keep the momentum of this going. And so what we're trying to do is to start the preparation on a consultation document. And so the most information that we have now enables our kaimahi to continue to work on that. But ultimately, you're agreeing to the consultation document in February. So anything that you can give us a direction on now is super helpful, because it helps us prepare for what you're looking to achieve, and then but ultimately you sign off on the consultation document in February, and we will accommodate that.
And I think that gives us a good signal that we do not want to create unnecessary work. For example, we want to try and do all of this in partnership and seamlessly with you. Councillor Free, I think you had another one anyway.
Well, oh, sorry, everyone. It was kind of say, I guess, if we were to put a proviso on that first option, would it also give an opportunity to clarify that very point for our public and for even our partners? As to why we might have felt the need to do that.
Yes, because, as Dougal indicated, we're working on this as, in a live environment, and Upper Hutt are working, and making a decision tomorrow. By tomorrow we'll know who's in the tent if we choose to go down that regional model, or if you choose to go down that regional model. And we want to have that conversation expediently to give that clarity, so that would also be factored in before we cut,
I was thinking
that
particularly about the debt issue that we have that's unique.
Yes, that's exactly right. And we'd want to land that in, before coming back to you as well in February.
Pauiwi Liz Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question might be down in the weeds a little bit, but I think it's still relevant that while we're talking at a high level about the pūtea, are we also going to be including value for our money? Because one of the big concerns that I have is that with our current model, current relationship with Wellington Water, what has always been missing is accountability. So while we give them the money, there's no way of telling us what they spent it on or how they spent it on. And what has sort of raised even more concerns for me is that I know that recently Wellington Water approached Porirua City Council looking for more pūtea to set up a software for asset management because they have none. And for me, it's like, well, why don't you have one? And apparently it's because their subcontractors have that, which then tells me, well, now that makes sense why we don't get the accountability back from our current provider, because they're the ones that are setting the agenda for what is being addressed. So what I'm asking or talking to is, as part of this new entity, is accountability going to be a key factor? Because I believe that it needs to be, because that's something that concerns our ratepayers all the time, is, they need this work done.
I think you're borderline into speech, but I think there is a question there about, is there a further accountability designed into this? Thank you.
One of the features of the new legislative environment is that there will be economic regulation coming into force that would apply to any delivery model for water services, including a CCO option, but also including if we continue to offer the service in-house from council. And one of the things that comes with that economic regulation is greater information transparency and information disclosure requirements. That again would apply regardless of which option you choose to go with going forward. So we're pretty confident that the new legislative environment will address that issue and improve that situation regardless of which option that you choose to go for. We also have the advice from MAFIC around the efficiency gains, looking at value for money.
Yep.
The advice that we have from MAFIC is that the Wellington Water model, where you have a management services CCO, does not deliver the level of efficiency gains that an independent CCO can have when they have control of the assets, their own budget, their own borrowing, setting their own charges and their own asset management plan. So the advice we have from MAFIC externally is that they are confident that a new asset-owning CCO would have better performance, better efficiency gains, deliver better value for money because of that independence and because of that alignment that we don't have in the Wellington Water model. So that's another consideration if you're thinking about what's different between the CCO we have now and a CCO we would have in the future. That's the key difference, is that the asset ownership, the setting of the budget, all of that would transfer to the new CCO. And as I say, the independent advice we have is that that will deliver that better value for money and efficiency.
Oh,
One more?
Well, I don't know if it is for here or for offline, but you'll tell me if I'm wrong anyway.
No offence, Liz.
So I understand, Dougal, you're going to be going to the Sui on Friday where they're going to be making a decision about each council putting in this extra money for this 1.5 million that has currently been asked for this software and for 12 more kaimahi. So if that hasn't come to us, how can we make that decision to you? How's that going to happen?
I think that's actually a question for our team, and I have heard about this. It's not news to me, Liz.
Yeah. Do you want me to? So Wellington Water have provided some advice around additional funding that they would like. We have not yet brought that advice to this council, but we will be bringing that advice through as soon as we possibly can. I'm looking at Chris in the back of the room who's madly typing and not listening, so just in case, I'm giving him a heads up. In terms of additional funding from Wellington Water, we were looking to probably set up some time for them to come in, hopefully, and talk to the council about what they're looking to do and bring that into the annual plan budgets. Yeah, and no, well, there's
the Wellington Water Committee are meeting on Friday, and the water, if you like, the local water done well AOG are meeting on Friday. 2 separate meetings. Yes.
All right. Councillor McNulty online.
Sorry, I put my hand down.
Oh, okay, great. All right. Is there anybody who hasn't asked a question who would like to? Otherwise, I'll go into another round. All right. Councillor Rogers.
Yeah, I was just wondering, in the multi-criteria analysis, we were looking at the different amounts of debt headroom, and we spent time talking about, I guess, the broad covenants that had been applied, the 280 and the 500, and less so about perhaps what the potential underlying covenants might be in terms of I can't remember what the other one is called now, but I saw in, I think it might have been Kapiti's analysis, they were kind of looking at the regional model being more around the 400%. So I was wondering if you could speak briefly to why we used the 280 and 500 instead of the, I guess, predicted effective borrowing.
I can't speak to what Kapiti did, unfortunately, sorry, but effectively the 280 is our current settings, what we are allowed under our council settings. The 500 is the upper limit of what the LGFA have put forward, and they have aligned that, it's without getting into too much detail, that they're, like I said before, the methodology that these entities would be used to rate to get a credit rating is quite different. So they'd use covenants like FFO to net debt, so which is free. It's a different set of settings. So the 500% we always talk about as a equivalent of debt to revenue, 500%. And the reason why it's that much higher than what we can get at council is because because of the nature of these entities and how they can leverage to a higher level. And that's kind of accepted. That's accepted practice for the nature of the entities that we're talking about. But the 400%, I'm not quite sure where that number's come from. So we've just used the lower and the upper bounds when we've discussed this with you in the past. Ultimately, again, that comes down to the negotiation that will occur between the water entity and the LGFA at a future state.
Ask another one? Yes. And then I also picked up on, in the MCA as well, there was this discussion around the difference between in-house contract out and the option of going it alone. And it discussed how the council would be able to access the same amount of borrowing under both options. And I was just wondering how that works in practice.
Which two options? Sorry, can you just clarify?
So it was page 15 of the MCA.
In-house.
And it was the in-house contract out status quo option is a version of a go-alone model. Officers recommend this in-house model over a go-alone asset-owning CCO model as the council can access the same amount of borrowing under both options.
So that option is essentially, so under the local water done well reform, there is an option for it to establish an internal business unit. What we have done is said, under that, you could choose to deliver that in one of two ways. You could have an internal business unit and contract it out, like what we do with our transport function currently. You could have an internal business unit and you could run it entirely in-house, like what we do for our parking services, so with staff, so FTE. So the model remains the same. It is still an internal business unit under the Local Water Done Well framework. It's just how you would give effect to that. You could do it one of two ways. There are pros and cons of each, and we just split that out. But for the purpose of a preferred option and shortlisting for consultation, it's brought back to an internal business unit.
I'm going to throw it to Sarah in a second, so just so you're ready. So that recommendation where we've said that the in-house contract out model, you can borrow up to 280%, and the CCO go alone, we also think you could borrow up to 280%.
Yeah.
That is based on the assumption that you would prioritise maintaining your council credit rating at the level you have it now, at the strong credit rating that you have it now. If you want to prioritise retaining your strong council credit rating, then a CCO go-alone option would have to restrict its borrowing to do that, because that CCO go-alone option, all of their debt will effectively be treated like it's your debt when the credit rating agency figures out what the council's credit rating is. So if you wanted to make a different assumption, which is to say that you were willing to reduce the council's credit rating, then you might be able, then the CCO would be able to borrow more, but it would have that detrimental effect. So that recommendation was based on that assumption. If you wanted to hold a different assumption, you'd come to a different view. And now I'll throw it to Sarah if she wants to add anything.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, that's really good, because I think that, I guess, kind of speaks to one of the other things that I was thinking about with the single council CCO was around the way that those, I guess, ratings were interlinked, and, you know, the idea, I guess, of a single council or a single CCO kind of running away with their debt borrowing, and sort of, you know, whether there would be steps that the LGFA would take in advance that would say, actually, your borrowing would breach the covenants of your parent council organisation, so we're not going to let you run away with that. Maybe that's too detailed for now, but...
So I guess just to pull the threads a little bit more, though, while they don't have that direct relationship to the credit rating agency, right? That they have a New Zealand Inc. view. They will lend on the settings that they have. There are mechanisms whereby we actually have not direct control, but through the guarantee that we provide to this entity, we have a linkage into it just between us, the LGFA, and the CCO as a triangle, if you like, and where we are the only parent council there. They would consider these factors in upfront when they're negotiating these debt to revenue covenants or equivalent, like I said before, where it'd be FFO to net debt or similar. That would be where that came in, and they would have a conversation with us, and they wouldn't give the CCO, as far as I know, the ability to go to 500% debt to revenue without us, you know, at least being informed or being able to engage on that. We're a quite close-knit sector, and they'd sort of be awake to that, but they're not putting in here mechanisms that would stop it, if that makes sense. But I think through the negotiations that would play out. But Jenny's right. These are all assumptions at this stage. We haven't had a rating evaluation done. These are future conversations for the LGFA to have. So this is just best information that we have in front of us at the moment.
Yeah. Cool.
Deputy Mayor Foon.
I guess I would just add, sorry, that, you know, we're talking about being able to restrict the CCO in terms of its borrowing. That may be possible, but we cannot at this point say that it's definitely possible. There is at least one clause in the bill today that I really want to understand what it means before saying to you that that would definitely be possible. So it's again this environment where it may be possible to restrict the borrowing of the CCO through those negotiations with the LGFA, but I don't think we can put our hands on our hearts and guarantee to you that that will be possible. It's just, I just wanted to put that caveat out there.
Deputy Mayor Phone.
Just looking in the paper on paragraphs 18 to 41, I think, on risk. So it's saying in there that that cross-subsidisation may still be a risk, but I thought we had agreed on a way forward there. So can you just explain again what our proposed way forward is and what is the risk we may be running?
Just give me one moment, please, Councillor.
Sure, call. Yeah. I have another one if you want me to.
Do you think you would just be able to expand on you said we have a way forward?
I think what I understood was that we had a mechanism to ring fence, thank you, Sarah, so that we weren't cross-subsidising, but in the paper we're saying it's still a risk. So I guess I just want to unpack that a bit more.
Yeah. So the DIA have updated their FAQ to address the issue of pricing harmonisation. And their FAQ confirms that if you establish a joint entity, there is no requirement to harmonise your pricing. But the issue of how a CCO would set its prices and what those principles would be is an open question still at this point. Add anything to that statement?
Yeah, so this is obviously a key issue which has come up with every council. How do we know we're not going to pay for someone else's problems? As has been outlined, there is no requirement for harmonisation of prices. A new CCO would need to simplify prices. There's a number of different ways of charging for water across our council, so you would need to work through a process of simplifying prices. But what we're also looking at is embedding a principle of cost to serve, so that there's a clear link between what does it cost to provide water to your household and what you pay, as distinct to what someone might pay for the cost to serve an upper hut. So, you know, there is a number of principles to work through in terms of actually firming up those pricing and what that means for individual households. But we're certainly looking to embed that there is no intent to move towards harmonisation, certainly not straight away, and B, that costs would be based on cost to serve, so that people pay fair and reasonable charges, and that again is what we expect that the Commerce Commission will look to implement as well.
Just in terms of the consultation on water meters, so I just want to establish that the business case won't be completed by the time we have to go out for consultation. So I guess two questions. What is it we will be consulting on? Like, do you know what we'll be asking our communities? And secondly, did I hear yesterday, will that be across the region? Will we be all consulting at the same time?
So we'll start with your last question first, Deputy Mayor. No, we won't be consulting on water meters across the region as a consistent item. Reason for that being is for Hutt City, for example, they have already gone through that exercise. Okay, so any conversation we have during consultation on water meters will be for Wellington City specifically. The conversation we need to have with our community is to make it clear that in the future, under various options, water meters are a probability and a high probability because of the advice we have received from the likes of the LGFA with funding. It's also because, as is articulated in the regional recommended model, that water meters are an effective tool at identifying leaks. And also ourselves, with our work with Wellington Water, we have progressed investigations to look at the feasibility, and we have put a significant amount of money in outer years for water meters. So it is a conversation that we need to have with our community, and it's something we need to do, as I say, to make sure that it is understood that water meters could be on the horizon. And no, we haven't figured out the exact question that we will ask. We need to work through that some more, yeah.
I'd just add to that this is about the provision of water meters. It doesn't change the way that we're looking at pricing or, billing at this point in time. It's about actually getting a good understanding of water usage and better controls around where there are leaks and monitoring that accordingly.
Councillor Randall.
Thank you. Just want to talk about a couple of things. One is about the efficiency gains that was outlined. I noticed there was a statement that efficiency gains are very difficult to estimate, at the very beginning, which, and then you've got these ranges which between different types of council-controlled organisations and such like. These efficiency gains, are they going to happen or are they possibilities?
Well, at this stage, they are a probability based on the information we provided to MAFIC as the external advisor. So these are using international research. What could an organisation go alone with a few councils, quite a few councils going in together, what could they expect? That is not a guarantee. I don't think anyone would be able to guarantee those returns, because there are always going to be a number of extenuating and extenuating circumstances and external drivers that could impact on those. Economic recession, global pandemic, all sorts of things, global supply chain issues. So seismic event, doomsday. So there's all sorts of things. So with the information that we provided to MAFIC and their expertise working across a number of councils, and as I say, with international research, this is their conservative estimate.
Okay.
Yeah.
This council went into Wellington Water on the basis largely of efficiency gains. Is there any evidence that Wellington Water is more efficient than what it replaced?
So I think that question came through in the written Q&A, and I'm not sure if that has been returned to yourselves yet, but what we have said there is with the time frame to respond to written Q&A, we weren't able to provide an answer on that. Look, I'm not sure how answering that will help our decision on a preferred option for consultation. There is quite a lot of work to do to understand what efficiency gains could be generated from our preferred model. So, and as we know, that as Jenny has articulated today, the operating model with Wellington Water is very, very different to what any of the proposed future options will be. And so I'm not sure it would be a like-for-like comparison.
Okay, I guess we're just trying to avoid deja vu. The last question is, yes, because that's been a disappointment. The last question really is a much simpler question. We're joining this entity, this proposed regional entity. If we join into that, we are a very large part of that. What percentage of the new entities should we join, along with Porua, Lower Hutt, Upper Hutt and the Regional Council, I understand? What percentage of the asset value of the new entity will be from Wellington City, roughly?
Yeah, I don't have that information to hand, but asset valuations is a complex issue. Is it replacement valuation? Is it for purposes of depreciation or insurance? So there's a range of different valuations and in which state you take them as well. It will be one of the issues that we'll need to work through as part of the transfer process, both the identification of assets and then the transfer, and then what that means for shareholding rights, etc.
Yes. So I guess I'm not sure if you could find out by tomorrow and maybe let us know. I'm just conscious that one of the key elements of the go it alone was that, we trigger a connection back to our own debt because our assets are more than 50% of the council control organisation, and looking at the size of us versus the size of the much smaller councils to the north, but also noting the regional council has substantive assets in terms of bulk water supply, etc. I just think it would be important for us to understand, that if we end up being 40% of the new regional, there still might be from the assessment, either from LGFA or Standard & Poor's back to our debt, because we're just still quite big.
Yeah. Look again, that will play out again in the governance structure as well, and how that is formed up. There's a range of options for how we would allocate the shareholding, Dougal. I think that was certainly contemplated under the previous reform. We don't have a clear answer on what that is now, but we would be going into that conversation and that negotiation with that very much front of mind, that should we own more than 50% of this, it runs through all of a large amount of the benefit that we would gain in having it structured that way.
And just to clarify, I think from yesterday, Sarah was saying that S&P look at the shareholding, like the shareholding in the organisation, which may have a relationship to the asset value, but may not. So that's one of the things that we would be negotiating is how do we determine what our shareholding is.
I just wondered if a number could be brought to tomorrow's meeting, because
a councillor would.
Just to give us an idea.
Probably the only thing we could possibly do is look at the 30 June 2024 annual reports and look at the book value and the depreciated replacement cost of the water assets. I'm not sure that that's going to give you the right information, or whether we'd be able to extract it. So there is, because there could be nuances. So
I understand you can only do what you can do.
Yeah, we can pull that information and bring that to you, but there'll be limitations with that as well. Yeah.
Councillor Free.
So, does the bill say anything about water meters, whether they're compulsory or not compulsory in this new model?
We haven't got into that level of detail in the short reading we've done, Councillor.
Okay. So we're assuming we'll be consulting on them as if they were optional. Well, if they're not, then why are we consulting?
All I can say is, again, in the 45 minutes that I had to look at the bill, I did not see anything in there about water meters or water meters being compulsory.
Okay.
I did read a section in the bill that talked about pricing and how a water organisation would be able to set their prices. And again, volumetric charging was an option. It was not the only option for how you could set those charges. So,
with the economic regulator, and I know this is all kind of stuff that will have to be ironed out, but are they envisaging that there will be standards for asset assessment and asset management for these new companies? Because that's where we've been let down by Wellington Water, badly.
So under, that would depend on the regimes that is set in place. What I can say is that from, the Commerce Commission perspective, they certainly look at the asset management planning of all regulated industries, and that is a fundamental aspect of how they determine things like information disclosures and price quality path. I don't know if the team have looked into this any further, but the asset management plans are reviewed by the Commerce Commission as part of that process.
Okay.
If I may, the only thing I'd add is it's a price quality economic regulation regime that the intent is to move towards. So it's not just about
Sorry,
price.
what does price quality mean?
Well, it means it's not only looking at what people are charged, but also the service that they are provided with. So we'd expect that as economic regulation is phased in over time, it'll move from information disclosure to demonstrate that you are providing a fair and appropriate level of service for the price that you're charging. So perhaps not looking at asset management practice, but certainly looking at levels of service, and can you demonstrate that people are receiving an appropriate level of service for the price that they pay.
So an example of that in the electricity industry is that electricity companies, they have something called a disruption index and a frequency index, and so they must show that they haven't had significant disruptions, and the frequency of those disruptions haven't been more than past years, right? So they look at those metrics and the performance metrics and levels of service that Dougal has been talking about. Those are set. If those entities do not meet those metrics, then that can cause the Commerce Commission to go in and look at their performance. So that's the kind of regulation that sits over top of these types of entities. It may not apply in this case. The Commerce Commission will need to set that, but that's what this kind of thing entails.
So I guess these are matters we can raise in our submission.
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Rogers.
Sorry to keep talking about water meters. My question is, if we go out to consultation and then make a decision on the future of water meters, to what effect is that binding on the future either SCCO or an MCCO? Single council controlled organisation.
Yeah, so the indications are that at the point where you transfer to a CCO, essentially they take over the existing pricing regime as it is on the day of transfer. So if we had changed the pricing regime before that, then they would take on that pricing regime and make decisions on that basis going forward. Dougal spoke earlier about discussions looking at pricing principles for a regional CCO and prioritising cost to serve, which might then provide some direction around that pricing. I'm not sure if you can comment on how Hutt City, because they're a bit further ahead than us, how they're managing that.
I think as well the issue you're raising is if you make a decision to implement meters, how do you know the entity will implement the meters?
Yeah, and I guess the counter of that as well.
Yeah. So the same is going to apply to all significant projects across the region. So, for example, Greater Wellington's very focused on additional storage lakes. Hutt City's very focused on Seaview. So what we'll try to do with the Water Services Plan is to outline the anticipated investment program over the next 30 years. That will give some degree of certainty and confidence of direction and travel for the new water services entity. And then as the board comes in, as the organisation is established, it will need to develop a water services strategy. Now, that water services strategy does need to respond to the direction that you set through Statement of Expectations and as you set through as a shareholder to the organisation, but that accountability will lie with the water services entity. But of course, you'll be giving them a very clear direction, a very clear start through the water services delivery plan.
Right, okay. Yeah, because I guess I'm just thinking about in terms of when we go out to consultation with the community and we make a decision, if that decision doesn't then flow on through to the water services entity, how people would feel about the consultation is kind of my concern. Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely hear what you're saying, Councillor. I'm not sure that we have worked that through enough or understood that. So that is a legitimate concern that we have as well. How we address that, as you can tell, we haven't figured that out. But we will, but to what Dougal has said, if there is an investment pathway that has been mapped out, then that is what we are passing over, and that is what we would expect through our Statement of Expectation and through the WSDP in all good faith to be enacted on. I think one of the questions that I have, and I don't know whether Bill 3 addresses it, is how conversations with the community are held with a CCO in place, because they have the primary relationship with the customer. So that's something we need to explore a bit more and get to grips with, I would suggest, yeah.
Deputy Mayor Foon.
Yeah, just on the stormwater, I guess you've already addressed it when we're talking about Sponge City tactics, and so I guess what I'm wondering is how it might look if the CCO does look after all the stormwater, but yet we're wanting to bring green infrastructure and I guess our experience is that generally a water CCO tends to think pipes rather than, so how might that look as we're going forward? I can see Sean's head popping up.
I'm going to jump in real quick before I'm sure Jenny probably chip in as well. Again, the little bit of reading we did prior to coming to this session today, the stormwater section in the bill does talk about green infrastructure. Now, what that means and to what extent we need to do a lot more work to understand. But also, as always, the statement of expectation is still a lever we have around our requirement of considering stormwater as more than just a suite of pipes. So I'm hopeful that the little bit we did read in Bill 3 gives us an opportunity, but we also have that governance tool as well. Jenny, is there anything else?
I guess I would just note again in the new bill there's a section talking about interface agreements and setting up interface agreements in the situation where stormwater pipes might be transferred to a CCO, as well as coordinating the stormwater plans. So the bill requires stormwater, I think they're called stormwater risk management plans, something like that, that you would be required to coordinate those, or you could in fact prepare a joint plan if you wanted to. So again, the bill is sort of looking at what mechanisms could be in place to manage that kind of interface. As well as, I guess, looking at what the Constitution or whatnot might send a direction in terms of values and whatnot in terms of working on green infrastructure.
I would add to that, the Water Services Bill continues to exist in a wider legislative environment, so your duties under the Resource Management Act remain. And I'm just sitting in the back of the room as a new RMA amendment bill has just been introduced. I'm afraid I've had a little bit less time than these guys, so I'm not as far.
Councillor Free?
Oh, just you did allude to the relationship, the direct relationship the new CCOs will have with the customer. Do they build, is it envisaged they'll build directly and be accountable to the customer?
Yes, Councillor, yes.
Yep. Okay. And the interface between our council and the CCO will be through, did you say an agreement or a letter of expectation or?
Yes, so it's a governance arrangement we have. So there will be a statement of expectation that the shareholding councils will provide to the CCO. The CCO will prepare a water services strategy. Getting this right? Just checking things haven't changed. They will prepare a water services strategy. They will consult with each council within that the shareholding agreement, and then they will be responsible for enacting on that strategy and reporting and monitoring against it.
I do agree with my colleague about the déjà vu. I hope it's not, but thank you.
Councillor Rogers?
Yeah, mine kind of goes back to sort of those interface agreements you were talking about, and one of the things I was trying to think of is, what are our interfaces with our two other waters? And in particular, I think about some of the reports that Greater Wellington put out recently in terms of cost to serve residents with water, particularly in dense urban environments as opposed to more sporadic urban environments. So I guess my question is around how do we manage the interface between council as an organisation that's responsible for spatial planning and the water entity who would like to deliver very, I guess, preferably cheap services to people who are consuming water?
Two things I think that I can say to that. One is that one of the requirements of the statement of expectation is that you set out your growth plans, and that is something that the CCO have to respond to in their water services strategy, so that they are essentially responding to the spatial planning that is done by council. But on top of that, in terms of what incentive is there towards density, it comes back to this cost to serve pricing principle. So again, the idea that behind the Commerce Commission favouring cost to serve pricing is that it will encourage more people to connect to the network in a way that is cheaper, because they will face the cost of connecting to the network in a less dense way. So that's one of the incentives in terms of, in the long term, trying to drive towards an efficient network, is that cost to serve pricing is designed to deliver that economically efficient network.
Yeah, I guess my other sort of thought is around, because the cost to serve through some models would be applied sort of as the consumption occurred as opposed to when the development occurred. And so I'm wondering how the organisation and its vision to deliver affordable services can be of influence to the parent council when they are making decisions about their development plans as opposed to just the council going down.
I'm not sure that the mechanisms are very clear on that at this point, Councillor. I would say, there's several sections in the bill around development contributions, because a CCO water organisation would be able to charge their development contributions directly, which adds then another dimension into the conversation that you're talking about. I don't think that we can give you a clear answer at this point, I'm afraid.
Cool. Is that two?
It's about 200, but okay. You can have one more.
My question was just, I guess, in relation to the changing nature of the modelling that had been done for the existing, joined up regional entity, and sort of the quantum of change we might see in affordability or viability, I guess, across the region. Especially if, Wellington is now, as Councillor Randall was alluding to, a larger portion of that. Sort of what risks that poses for the organisation if Wellington City wasn't a partner in the regional model. Just thinking regionally, it's sort of like...
As the chair outlined at the start, we work in a very dynamic environment, so obviously we only knew that Masterton wasn't part of our journey last week.
Yeah.
So we haven't worked through all those different kind of scenarios of who's in or who's out. I think what we will have, going back to Councillor Randall's questions earlier on, was we'll have a very clear picture in time for consultation of what does this look like under the different scenarios of a kind of a status quo versus a regional model, and that'll give a good basis to be able to articulate costs for our communities going forward under those different scenarios.
Awesome.
Thank you very much. Just to add to that, I think that because of the revenues that Wellington City Council brings to any regional model, it would be far beneficial for all of the other councils if Wellington City Council was within the regional model, because particularly from a financial perspective and particularly from a size and scale perspective.
Cool. Thank you. Those are all of my questions.
Oh. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Pennant, I'm just checking. No. Yeah, you might just want to watch this session, and I cannot wait. Deputy Mayor Foon.
Just last one from me, promise.
You're making me feel guilty.
Struggling to keep up with Councillor Rogers. Just the customer-facing aspect, I think that was one of the biggest concerns of the community, was how would they be able to interact with this new CCO, and I think you brought it up before, Margot, and that is the thing we're hearing least about, so I don't recall anything in the papers. So when we go to consultation, how will we be answering that question for them?
If I said very carefully, would that count? No. It is a very good question, and we do need to think about the customer, our ratepayers being at the heart of the future of the delivery model. We talk about the delivery model a lot, and it's quite a cold way of looking at it when we're thinking about quite an essential and critical service. So For us to, it's a bit like the water charges conversation that Councillor Randall was asking. For us to be able to get to the point of thinking about a level of detail like that, we ideally would look at answering and developing that for one or two options rather than thinking about, if we established a consumer trust, here's how it would interact with the customer. So in saying that, there have been some conversations as we've started to workshop what might the establishment of a regional CCO look like, how might we factor in that kind of thing. We haven't got to the point of being able to answer that particularly, Deputy Mayor, but what I think would be a fairly logical expectation is that there will be a transition period where, whilst the CCO will have the primary relationship, if the customer chose to call Wellington City Council, we would not say no. So there would surely be a no wrong door policy in place for a period of time. Now, I hope I'm not signing us up to something, Dougal, that we don't agree with, but there would need to be a transition period both for us and for our customers is what I'd be suggesting, yeah.
If I can add a small comment on that. So we've begun the thinking around the establishment strategy and the implementation process. And that includes a number of principles. One of those principles that's really important is the customer must be at the heart. So we need to ensure that the customer journey through the transition process is thought about very, very carefully. So how do you ensure that you don't drop the ball on a phone being answered? How do you ensure that you don't drop the ball on a Toby being fixed or a project being delivered? So those will be really important considerations. So it's a critical principle. It's a really good point, Deputy Mayor. It's a really important principle for transition that we need to embed in the process.
I think that brings us to the end of the questions. So I'd like to thank the team. Thank you, Dougal, and for answering the huge variety of questions that we have. Thank you so much, everyone.